Picture a barefoot man wandering through the busiest market in Athens, 24 centuries ago. The stalls are overflowing: silver, spices, sandals, perfume, things he could never afford and would never buy. And instead of envy, he stops, looks around at all of it, and smiles. "So many things," he says, "that I have no need of." That man was Socrates. And if you clicked on this video expecting the secret of the person whose house is always spotless, you might be surprised to learn that the philosopher I want to introduce you to owned almost nothing. No tidy shelves. No matching dishes. He wore the same worn cloak in summer and winter. By every modern standard, his life looked like the opposite of a clean, curated home. So why him? Why is a man who owned next to nothing the right guide for understanding the person whose kitchen counter is always wiped, whose bed is always made, whose space is somehow always in order? Because Socrates understood something we keep getting backwards. He understood that the clean house was never really about the house. Let me show you what I mean. You've been in that home. You walk in, and it's spotless, not because guests are coming, not because they spent the weekend scrubbing, but because it's simply always that way. And a small, quiet voice in you asks, how do they do it? Are they more disciplined than me? Do they have more time? Do they just enjoy it more? And underneath that question, if you're honest, there's a sharper one: what's wrong with me? Maybe you've made peace with the mess. The dishes in the sink. The chair that wears your clothes instead of you. The mail that breeds in a pile by the door. You've told yourself a tidy little story: I'm just a messy person. I've always been this way. That's just who I am. And you keep promising yourself you'll deal with it later, that magical, weightless word, later. You'll tidy up when the weekend comes, when work calms down, when you finally feel like it. But later keeps not arriving, and the pile keeps quietly growing. And the strangest part is how all of it drains you. You come home tired and you can't relax, and you don't connect the heaviness in your chest to the heaviness in the room. You blame your job, your sleep, the weather, anything but the thing you stopped seeing weeks ago. Now, here is where Socrates walks in. Because Socrates spent his entire life doing one thing to the people of Athens, and it made him both beloved and despised. He asked them questions. Not to humiliate them, to wake them up. He would find a man absolutely certain he knew what justice was, or courage, or goodness, and simply by asking, he would reveal that the man had never actually examined the thing he was so sure about. He had opinions. He just never turned them over in the light. So Socrates would ask you, gently, when you say I'm just a messy person, is that something you actually know about yourself? Or is it only an opinion you've repeated so often it started to feel like fact? He drew a hard line between the two, between mere opinion, which we inherit and absorb without thinking, and real knowledge, which we earn by examining. And almost everything we believe about ourselves lives on the wrong side of that line. That's what this is going to be about. In the next few minutes, I want to walk you through 5 things a clean home quietly reveals, not about your cleaning habits, but about your relationship with yourself, seen through the eyes of a man who was executed for refusing to stop asking inconvenient questions. And the 5th one is the one almost nobody sees coming, because it's the one Socrates cared about more than any other. Hold on to that. The first thing a clean home reveals is whether you actually know yourself. Carved above the temple at Delphi were 2 words that Socrates made the work of his entire life: know thyself. It sounds simple, almost like a fridge magnet. But he meant something brutal by it. He meant that most people walk through their whole lives as strangers to themselves, acting on impulses and stories they've never inspected. Now think about your home. There's a pile somewhere right now that you genuinely no longer see. Your eyes slide right past it. The clutter became wallpaper. And that's the point. The person who maintains their space every day hasn't trained themselves to clean more. They've trained themselves to keep seeing. They notice the cup before it becomes the pile. They notice the friction before it becomes the chaos. Your home, in other words, is one of the most honest mirrors you own, and the question is whether you're willing to look into it. Because the dust you stopped noticing on the shelf is the same dust you stopped noticing in a dozen other corners of your life. What else have you simply stopped seeing? The second thing it reveals is whether you're living on autopilot or actually examining your days. Socrates said the thing he is most remembered for while standing trial for his life. Offered the chance to stop questioning, to go quiet and live out his days in peace, he refused, because, he argued, a life that is never examined is not worth living for a human being. He would rather die than sleepwalk. We usually treat that as a grand philosophical statement, something for monks and professors. But it's astonishingly concrete. The unexamined life is the one that just happens to you. The dishes pile up not because you decided to let them, but because no decision was ever made at all. You drifted. The person whose home stays in order isn't necessarily more disciplined than you, and we'll come back to that, because the word discipline is hiding a lie. What they've done is examined the cost. They've felt, consciously, what the mess does to them, and they've chosen against it. And the cost is real, not imagined. Researchers at Princeton found that physical clutter actually competes for your attention. It overloads the visual part of your brain and quietly chips away at your ability to focus, even when you're not consciously looking at it. Every unopened envelope, every dish left in the sink, registers somewhere in your mind as unfinished business, and unfinished business is mentally expensive. You're paying a tax you never agreed to. The unexamined home is exactly that, 100 small open loops, draining you in a currency you can't see. Every wiped counter is a tiny act of examination, a small refusal to sleepwalk, and a way of closing one of those loops on purpose. So the question stops being how do I clean more, and becomes something far more uncomfortable, how much of my day am I actually awake for? The third thing, and this is the one that goes deepest, is what you believe you deserve. Here is the charge Socrates leveled at the wealthy, ambitious citizens of Athens, the ones running after money and reputation and bodily pleasure. He looked at them and asked, "Aren't you ashamed? You pour all this care into your possessions and your status and your appearance, and you give almost no thought at all to the care of your soul." The Greek word is epimelia. The care of the self. He believed that was the one thing genuinely worth tending. Now watch how this lands in your living room. There is research showing that people who describe their homes as cluttered and full of unfinished things carry higher levels of stress hormones through the entire day. Their baseline of unease is literally elevated by the space they sit in. But Socrates would push past the biology to something sharper. He'd say your home is an outward confession of inward care. When you let your space rot, you are quietly telling yourself a message: this is fine, this is what I deserve, I'm not worth the 10 minutes. And when you restore order to it, when you wipe the table and make the bed, you are sending the opposite message, the one most of us never say out loud: I live here. I'm worth tending to. The state of your home is the care of your soul, made visible. There's a reason this hits so hard. So much of your life sits completely outside your hands: the economy, other people's moods, what your boss decides in a meeting, what the day throws at you on the way home. Most of it, you cannot answer for. But the kitchen counter, the made bed, the wiped sink, that is a small kingdom you actually rule. When you restore order to it, you're not just cleaning, you're reminding yourself that you are someone who can take care of something, who can answer for at least one corner of existence. Neglect it, and you reinforce the opposite story, that nothing you do matters, that you're at the mercy of the mess, inside and out. And that raises a question worth sitting with: if a stranger read only your space, what would they conclude you believe about your own worth? The fourth thing it reveals is whether you've mistaken a story for a fact. Socrates held a strange and radical belief about human wrongdoing. He thought no one does wrong on purpose. When people act badly, he argued, it's never out of pure malice, it's out of ignorance. They've simply failed to see clearly. Correct the ignorance, and the behavior follows. Apply that to the sentence you've probably said about yourself: I'm just a messy person. Modern psychology would tell you that your actions flow from your identity, that once you believe you're a disorganized person, you'll generate the evidence to prove it, letting things pile up and shrugging, well, that's just me. But here's where Socrates and the psychologists shake hands. That identity isn't a fact you discovered. It's an opinion you absorbed, maybe from a messy parent, maybe from one bad season of your life that you turned into a life sentence. It's ignorance wearing the costume of destiny. And ignorance can be examined. Identity isn't carved in stone, it's built from evidence, and the evidence comes from what you do. Wipe one counter and you've introduced a single, stubborn fact that contradicts the whole story. Do it enough times and the story has no choice but to change. So the real question isn't are you a messy person? It's who told you that, and why did you believe them? The fifth thing, the one almost nobody expects, is whether you're listening to your own inner signal. Socrates claimed something that got him into enormous trouble. He said he had a kind of inner voice, he called it his daimonion, a small divine sign, that would speak up at certain moments. It never told him what to do. It only ever stopped him, a quiet internal no when he was about to step wrong. He trusted it more than the opinion of the entire city. Now think about what actually happens in your body when you walk into a messy room. Before any thought, there's a tightening. A low hum of unease. And when you step into a clean, ordered space, there's the opposite, an exhale, a loosening, a sense that things are handled and you're safe. That feeling is not nothing. That is your own daimonion. It's the part of you that registers, beneath conscious thought, the difference between a life that's being tended and one that's quietly unraveling. Most people spend years overriding that signal, calling it pickiness or fussiness, drowning it out. The person with the spotless home isn't superhuman. They simply stopped ignoring the voice. And here's the twist Socrates would land on, the cleaning was never the point. The point was learning to listen to yourself again. So let me step back, because if you think this video was about housework, you've missed what just happened. Socrates was put on trial and sentenced to death for one stubborn refusal. He would not stop asking people to examine their own lives. He would not let them mistake reputation for character, or possessions for a well-lived soul. He drank the poison rather than betray that. And the staggering thing is how small the practice of his philosophy actually is. It doesn't require a mountaintop. It fits inside a made bed. It hides in a wiped counter. Every one of those tiny acts is a miniature know thyself, a refusal to sleepwalk, a quiet vote for the care of your own soul. And notice what this reframe quietly destroys. We started by asking whether the person with the spotless home was simply more disciplined than you, and that word, discipline, was the lie all along. Discipline is the story we tell to keep ourselves off the hook. They have some willpower I was never issued. But that's not what you're watching. You're watching someone who examined their life closely enough that caring for it stopped feeling like a battle and started feeling like breathing. They're not whiter-knuckled than you. They're more awake than you. And awareness, unlike willpower, doesn't run out. So the question was never is your house clean? That's just the surface. The real question, the Socratic one, the one that follows you out of this video, is this: are you paying attention to what your space is trying to tell you about how you're treating the single life you have? Because you can keep holding the opinion that you're just a messy person. Or you can do the one thing Socrates begged an entire city to do, and finally examine it. Which brings me back to that barefoot man in the market, smiling at all the things he didn't need. He owned almost nothing, and yet his life was in perfect order, because the order he cared about was on the inside. You and the person with the spotless home and Socrates with his empty hands might all be reaching for the same thing from different directions, a self that has been looked after. A life someone is awake for. So I'll leave you with his kind of question rather than my command. What if, tonight, before you sleep, you wipe down a single surface, not to clean it, but to notice what it asks of you? And then watched, over the next few days, what that small act does to the voice inside that's been telling you who you are. Of the 5 signs we walked through, I'm curious which one landed closest to home for you. Drop it in the comments. I read them. If someone came to mind during this, that friend whose house is always somehow spotless, send this their way. Now you both know what it was really about. And if you want to keep examining the life you're actually living instead of sleepwalking through it, subscribe and stay with me.